February 6, 2023 is a day nobody in the Premier League is going to forget. Just the previous night, Manchester City had lost to Tottenham Hotspurs. The season was in danger of falling apart. Arsenal was pulling ahead, but that wasn't the biggest worry on City hierarchy's mind. The Premier League had just dropped a bombshell. February 6, 2023 saw the Premier League charge Manchester City with over 100 breaches of their financial rules. It sent shockwaves throughout the footballing world. Now, to be clear, this is not the first time Manchester City's finances have been questioned, but these charges, if proven, have the potential to not only damage Manchester City for a long time, but change football as we know it. This could be the biggest scandal in football, almost at par with the Calciopoli match-fixing scandal, or maybe even bigger. But what exactly are these charges? What merit do they have? And what could be the consequences? Well, let's take a deep dive into the charges against Manchester City. Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. Before we begin, it's important to understand what these charges are. Premier League conducted a 4-year-long investigation that resulted in them charging City with multiple categories of breaches over a period of 2009-10 season to the 2017-18 campaign. For a lot of people, these charges are related to FFP, financial fair play. But in reality, the charges are way more serious than a mere FFP breach. Manchester City hasn't just been accused of breaching FFP, but the charges essentially say that they have allegedly cooked the books and submitted false accounts. Not only that, it is said that they also failed to cooperate with the investigations. Basically, Manchester City has allegedly committed fraud. The first and the most serious set of charges of all is that Manchester City provided inaccurate financial information. They say that City has not provided, and I quote, "in the utmost good faith, accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position, in particular with respect to its revenue, including sponsorship revenue, its related parties, and its operating costs," end quote. In other words, Manchester City is accused of inflating its revenue by disguising money put in by its owners as commercial revenue. Basically, the commercial deals from all the UAE-related parties are under scrutiny, like the shirt and stadium sponsorship deal with Etihad Airways, the deal with Etisalat, etc. For example, Etihad Airways had entered a 10-year-long £400 million deal in 2011 that saw City's stadium renamed to Etihad Stadium. That included the shirt sponsorship deal extension as well as the development of the Etihad campus. Currently, the deal with Etihad is around £70 million a year, which includes £50 million for shirt sponsorship and £20 million for stadium naming rights. It is currently the highest such arrangement in England. Overall, City's commercial revenue has risen constantly since the takeover, over £300 million since the 2008-9 season, and the Abu Dhabi sponsors have been a big part of it. According to the Deloitte Football Money League, Manchester City was at the top in 2022 with total revenue generated being €731 million, ahead of clubs like Real Madrid, Liverpool, Manchester United and Barcelona. The second set of charges relates to Manchester City allegedly not providing full details of remuneration or wages, which is then further divided into two elements. The first is manager remuneration, which covers Roberto Mancini's tenure for the 4 seasons between 2009-10 and 2012-13. The second element is player remuneration, covering the period between 2010-11 and 2015-16 seasons. According to the leaks that were published in Der Spiegel, Mancini had signed a contract for £1.45 million base salary a year, but his company was paid an additional £1.75 million as a consultant for 4 days of coaching a year. This consultancy agreement was off the books. It's also alleged that some players were also paid massive sums. According to the leaks, Leroy Sane was reportedly guaranteed £24.5 million over 3 years when he joined as a 20-year-old, while Sergio Aguero was allegedly paid £18 million annually or £346,000 a week. Ilkay Gundogan allegedly earned €11 million last year, according to Der Spiegel. The third set of charges is related to City being allegedly unable to comply with UEFA's FFP rules. These charges are over the 5 seasons between 2013-14 and 2017-18. To be honest, this is not the first time Manchester City has been mentioned in an alleged FFP breach. Back in 2014, they were fined £49 million by UEFA for breaching their FFP rules. Also, in February 2020, UEFA banned Manchester City for 2 years from European competitions after an investigation found them guilty of serious breaches of UEFA's FFP rules, but was later overturned by CAS. The fourth set of charges relates to Manchester City being unable to comply with the Premier League's profitability and sustainability rules over the period from 2015-16 to 2017-18 seasons. While City don't have any issues meeting the Premier League's FFP targets now, this was not always the case, and this somewhat relates to the charges about City allegedly cooking their accounts. The fifth set of charges relates to Manchester City's lack of cooperation with the investigation. This covers the period of 4 years the Premier League spent investigating Manchester City. Basically, City are charged with failing to cooperate with the Premier League in its investigation, including providing documents and information in the utmost good faith. The Premier League claims that one of the reasons this investigation has taken so long is that City has used numerous delaying tactics. So, what is Manchester City's response to these charges? Expectedly, the club denied any wrongdoing. They say in the statement, and we quote, "The club is surprised by the issuing of these alleged breaches of the Premier League rules, particularly given the extensive engagement and vast amount of detailed materials that the EPL has been provided with. The club welcomes the review of this matter by an independent commission to impartially consider the comprehensive body of irrefutable evidence that exists in support of its position. As such, we look forward to this matter being put to rest once and for all." End quote. So, it's about time we examine these charges a little closer, right? What's going on here? It is apparent that right now Manchester City doesn't have any issues with financial stability or FFP. Winning trophies would usually do that. In fact, just as we are making this video, Manchester City published their annual report for 2022-23 and announced revenues of £712.8 million, a new Premier League record. But it wasn't always like this. Manchester City definitely benefited from the Abu Dhabi takeover. Manchester City's commercial revenue has grown from £20.5 million in 2009 to £316 million in 2022. In fact, City's commercial revenue in 2021-22 season was the highest in England, almost £50 million higher than Manchester United, who was second in England. Though in Europe, City were behind PSG and Bayern Munich. However, the commercial revenue in itself isn't the biggest issue. One of the most serious sets of charges levied against Manchester City is that the commercial revenue is money put in by the owners in disguise of sponsorship. As we alluded to earlier, Manchester City's current sponsorship with Etihad Airways, previously owned by the Abu Dhabi government and now owned by ADQ, Abu Dhabi state-controlled sovereign wealth fund, is about £50 million for shirt sponsorship and a further £20 million for stadium naming rights per year. The question is the sponsorship money coming from Etihad or is it coming from owners' own pockets? In 2018, based on the now infamous Football League's cash, Der Spiegel claimed that in 2015, out of the £67.5 million of Etihad sponsorship, only £8 million were paid by Etihad, while £59.5 million were supposed to be paid by ADUG, the group that owns Manchester City. Another accusation leveled at Manchester City is that commercial revenue accounts for 51% of the total revenue, which is deemed unhealthy. Though PSG and Bayern Munich both have commercial revenue proportions of 59% and 58% respectively, a bit higher than Manchester City's. Coming back to the Etihad deal, the leaks and the Der Spiegel reports were damning. But has there been a closer examination of it at any point? Of course. This is not the first time Manchester City has been accused of similar stuff. In 2020, UEFA banned City from European competitions for 2 years and levied a €30 million fine for not cooperating with the investigations. However, on appeal, CAS overturned the ban and reduced the fine to 10 million euros. So, what were the UEFA charges and why were they overturned by CAS? Let's take a closer look. In 2020, Manchester City were found guilty by UEFA's Club Financial Control Body, or CFCB, of having falsely inflated their sponsorship revenues when they made submissions for the FFP compliance process. The guilty finding was a response to an investigation sparked by the publication of leaked emails and documents by Der Spiegel in November 2018 that we talked about earlier. Manchester City responded by lodging an appeal in the Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS. Manchester City alleged in their statement that the outcome had been prejudged from the beginning and that the process was flawed and consistently leaked, saying the club was disappointed but not surprised by the decision. Later in 2020, CAS lifted the ban, clearly stating the City had not disguised equity funding from their owners as sponsorship, adding that, quote, most of the alleged breaches were either not established or time-barred, end quote. What does this mean? CAS released a 93-page document detailing its decision, stating that based on the evidence provided in the hearing, and I quote, Etihad fully complied with its payment obligations towards MCFC and that MCFC rendered the contractually agreed services to Etihad in return, end quote. It also stated that, quote, the majority of the panel finds that Etihad sponsorship agreements are presumed to be negotiated at fair value and MCFC, HHSM, ADUG and Etihad are not considered related parties, end quote. The fair value concept is the most important to FFP regulations because otherwise an owner can simply inflate a sponsorship value via related parties. Also, fair value is one of the most difficult things to assess. It somewhat becomes essential to look at that if the high-value UAE sponsorships of City are suspicious for owner involvement in those companies, are there other clubs with similar high-value sponsorship where their owners are involved with the sponsoring party? Yes, there certainly are. For example, one of the staunchest critics of City, Bayern Munich, has strategic partnerships with Adidas, Audi, and Allianz that bring in 116 million euros a year in total. These three German companies hold an 8.33% stake each in the club. The rest 75% is owned by the fans. There's a similar arrangement at Borussia Dortmund too, where companies who have a stake in the club also have sponsorship deals with the club. Evonik, which owns a 9.8% stake, also has a 20 million euro shirt sponsorship deal with the club. Puma, which owns a 5% stake in the club, has a 30 million euro kit deal with them. And Signal Iduna, which has a 5.4% stake in the club, has a stadium rights deal of 5.8 million euros. In Italy, Juventus also has a 45 million euro per year shirt sponsorship deal with Jeep, increased from a 17 million euro a year in 2019. Jeep is part of Fiat, which is owned by the Agnelli family, who also own Juventus. In the Premier League itself, Leicester received £16 million a year from King Power till 2021. Now, in no way we are saying these deals are suspicious. We just want to reiterate that owner or shareholder related parties sponsoring the said owners or shareholders club isn't out of the ordinary. Either way, CAS stated, and I quote, the panel was also provided with credible and uncontested evidence regarding the functioning of Etihad's owner, the Abu Dhabi government, as well as the Abu Dhabi Accountability Authority. While in the absolute, the panel cannot exclude the theoretical possibility that Etihad may have received funding from third parties and that this was somewhat indirectly arranged by HHSM or ADUG, this would rather add another missing link to the puzzle, because not only is there no evidence of such a link between HHSM and or AUDG and such third parties, there is also no such evidence to establish a link between such third parties and Etihad. This argument remains entirely unparticularized and unproven, end quote. Regarding the smaller Etisalat sponsorship deal, CAS ruled, quote, for the alleged disguised equity funding by HHSM or ADUG through Etisalat, this has a consequence that UEFA is barred from prosecuting MCFC on this basis because any such alleged breach falls outside the limitation period, end quote. In other words, the Etisalat sponsorship was time-barred from further investigation as any alleged breach was considered to have fallen outside the limitation period. CAS also indicated that UEFA's charges also raise questions about the auditors that audit City financials regularly and are unwarranted. CAS said, quote, UEFA's theory would also mean that not only MCFC lied to the FA and UEFA, but also to the accountancy firms such as BDO, Deloitte, Ernst & Young and Alex Partners that all examined accounts for one or more entities involved were all misled. The panel finds that such allegations are also not warranted based on the evidence presented. End quote. Incidentally, CAS did agree with UEFA on Manchester City's non-cooperation with the investigation, but not entirely. They deemed that while Manchester City clearly failed to cooperate with the CFCB's investigation, UEFA too failed to pursue all the evidentiary requests specifically related to providing complete and unredacted runs of emails that were leaked, and thus could not sanction Manchester City based on that. Manchester City had their fine reduced from 30 million euros to 10 million euros in the end. Coming to the charges related to manager remuneration, Der Spiegel published more leaked documents and emails last year to indicate Mancini received 2 separate payments from the Manchester City hierarchy. They also indicated that between 2010 and 2015, the owner's company apparently paid at least 4 million euros and 4 million pounds to a company belonging to the agent of club legend Yaya Toure. Now, it's difficult to examine if the separate payment made to Mancini was off the books to compensate him for his services to Manchester City, or whether it was a perfectly fine payment as a fee for his coaching consultancy services to Al Jazeera Club, a group controlled by Sheikh Mansour, without further investigation. Regarding player remuneration, Yaya Toure's former manager Dimitri Seluk, whose name and signatures were on the leaked agreement, denied any such payments. Seluk was asked by The Guardian whether City had made him any secret payments when he represented the player at the club. He said, quote, "No, everything was transparent. There was nothing on the backside. I'm interested to see what happens as this was a surprise. Yaya paid everything, tax and everything. It was all transparent." End quote. He further added that he would tell the independent commission the same if contacted. Yet again, only further investigation can offer insights into the truth. However, thanks to stellar work by Swiss Ramble, whose Substack and Twitter will be linked in the description below, we can say that there was a clear reduction in Manchester City wages in 2013-14 season when their staff was cut by 30% from 449 to 314. This was done by transferring staff from the club to CFG, the club's parent company. Though it is a very common practice in business, it's pretty rare in the world of football. This change reduced their wages by £28 million in 2013-14. Such arrangements offer a scope for creative accounting, but are not definitive proof that such manipulation of accounts occurred. Since then, Manchester City's wage bill and staff have only grown, and as of 2021-22 was a reported £354 million. But they are still behind PSG, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United and Liverpool. The increase in City's wage bill is in line with the general increase in wages of the top clubs. Premier League also charged Manchester City with delaying tactics and non-cooperation with the investigation. During the CAS hearing, UEFA raised similar concerns, stating that Manchester City refused to answer questions, refused to provide documents, refused to arrange for the attendance of requested people, and ultimately even instructed its own expert witness not to answer specific questions. Eventually, despite caveats, CAS sided with UEFA and stated that, quote, MCFC failed to cooperate with the CFCB's investigation in respect of 2 separate issues, end quote. In the ruling, they said that Manchester City could have provided the evidence asked for in front of CFCB in the first place, which they later produced during the CAS hearing. We will link the CAS ruling in the description below. So now that we have taken a deeper, harder look into these charges, what conclusions can be drawn? Will Manchester City be found guilty? Or will the Premier League case go the same way the UEFA case went? The answer differs based on who you ask. If you're a Manchester City's rival club or the fan, City has always been guilty of creative accounting, and this is just a chicken coming home to roost. If you're a Manchester City fan, this is and always has been a ploy to damage a fast-rising club to protect the status quo. But it also raises questions about the concept of financial fair play. Is it there to protect the clubs from going bankrupt in pursuit of success on the field? Or is it there to protect the historically successful clubs at the top and stop any other club from joining the elite? Where there's money, there's corruption. On one hand, the football leaks published by Der Spiegel are a damning set of emails and documents that raise massive questions about the operations of a so-called well-run club who have gone above and beyond every measure to circumvent the rules set forth and agreed upon by every club. On the other hand, the CAS ruling, the one thing that's available in the public domain as of now and the only place where the evidence has been scrutinized, sort of exonerated Manchester City of any wrongdoing, at least in terms of creative accounting. Now, before anyone says anything, we want to clarify that the leaked emails and documents, at least the ones published before the CAS hearing, were admissible in the case, were examined, and the ruling included them as part of why UEFA was within their rights to bring a case against Manchester City. Since then, more leaked emails and documents were published that are part of the Premier League case, and it remains to be seen if those documents and emails will help the Premier League in their case, or if Manchester City will be able to provide further context to the leaked documents that help them prove their case. So, what are the consequences, and what do we think can happen to Manchester City? Honestly, we don't know. The case is in front of an independent commission, and for now, it seems that any verdict on this will take a long time to come, as the case is very complicated. Is there any precedent regarding such cases? Just as we were making this video, Everton were found guilty of breaching financial rules and have been docked 10 points, the heaviest punishment ever handed to a Premier League team. Just a few days earlier, reports by The Guardian, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists detailed leaked documents that appear to show a series of payments worth tens of millions of pounds made by Abramovich-owned companies to entities linked to deals that appear to benefit Chelsea. This could lead to Chelsea facing further scrutiny about their funding and possible financial fair play breaches under the previous owner Roman Abramovich. But there's no case yet. In the case of Manchester City, pundits speculate that if the charges against them are upheld, Manchester City could face anything from massive points deduction to being stripped of some of their titles during the period of alleged breaches to all the way to relegation. Will it happen? We'll find out in due time. All we can say is that these are going to be very interesting times. Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it, share if you found it worthy, and subscribe for more content like this. This is Salty Football.